Good evening, I'm Joe Carbonetta, and from the Pasadena Media Center, this is Arroyo Live. This program is produced by Pasadena Media to help enrich the community through informative and meaningful conversation. As always, you can share your comments with us anytime at arroyolive@pasadenamedia.org. It can be argued that environmental sustainability is a concept which was first conceived and employed more than 100 years ago. Native Americans, like many indigenous peoples the world over, embodied such ideas as a way of life long before the first industrial revolutions. But the modern concept of environmental sustainability, the version we know today, can only trace its roots back as far as 1987. In a report produced by the United Nations, which actually sought to define the terms of sustainable development and coincidentally uncovered its ties to the health of our environment. In 1798, Thomas Malthus published his Essay on the Principle of Population, in which he theorized that population tends to grow faster than resources, ultimately leading to overexploitation of any such available resources. In a moment, a conversation with some members of our community actively involved in the work of improving sustainability and the environment. Please join me for this edition of Arroyo Live. Joining me are Community 2.0 CEO Greg Apodaca and Youth Climate Strike LA climate activist Sim Bilal. Welcome to both of you.
I'm the CEO and founder of Community 2.0. It's an organization that is endeavoring to mobilize communities here locally, first around LA County, but then nationally and linking with communities globally to help fight climate emergency challenges. 4 years ago, I heard that humanity was at a turning point, that we could either save the planet or on the path that we had already set ourselves on, we were on path to destroy it ecologically. So I quit my job and said, I'm all in. Let's do what we can do to make this thing happen.
All right. Well, again, thank you for joining us this evening. And Sim, over to you.
I'm a activist with Youth Climate Strike Los Angeles. I'm the logistics lead. I'm originally born and raised in South Los Angeles. I come from a multicultural background. I'm Korean, Black, and Chickasaw. So, thanks for having me.
Well, and again, thank you to you as well for joining us this evening. I suppose we should start out by talking about the history of the sustainability movement. And I'd like to pose that question to the both of you. I don't know who would like to tackle it first, but if you could tell us a little bit about the history of the sustainability movement.
You want me to chime in there, Sim?
Yeah, go for it, Greg.
I mean, what I know about it is the first Earth Day was about 50 years ago, right? I was heavily involved in trying to do a big 50-year anniversary event in front of City Hall at Grand Park. And I think, a whole bunch of us worked for about a year to make it happen. And then COVID hit and we had to cancel the thing about 3 weeks before. But so for the last 50 years, I think the climate, I guess, culture had been around Earth Day and trying to do recycling and like that to help save the planet. Over the course of those 50 years, climate scientists have been telling us that global warming was getting worse and worse. People ignored it. And finally, people are waking up where I guess about cut to the chase here, kind of Al Gore, I guess about 10 or so years ago, wrote that book called An Inconvenient Truth. And that a lot of people became aware of global warming and a lot of people started getting more active. And my ears perked up when I heard about that. And I think since then, word has spread and I think governments started taking action first. And scientists, of course, had been doing that for a long time. And then finally, climate activists started getting much more vocal about the state of the emergency. And now finally, corporations and even asset managers are doing that too. So I guess that's the background I have to offer. How about you, Sim?
Yeah, definitely going to echo what you said about the inconvenient truth. That was definitely one of the first media pieces that sort of, brought my awareness to, this movement of sustainability or just the climate emergency in general. I had to be about maybe 4 or 5 at the time, and it just completely traumatized me. And it's part of why I'm here today. But for me, I know, the history of sustainability goes, it was a practice less that, that wasn't, called sustainability, but it was practiced by, communities across the globe. It was practiced by the indigenous peoples here of this land. And so, I think the sustainability movement has good intentions, but it has been largely co-opted by, a lot of greenwashing by corporations to this present. So, I think the tensions are there, that sustainability is something we should all be practicing, but being aware that, companies like BP created the carbon footprint. So sustainability has a history of greenwashing. And I think, we gotta call that out.
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that if you use the word or say the word sustainability for most Americans, they'll instantly think of recycling. But there's a lot more to sustainability than simply recycling plastic goods or paper products. I'm wondering if either of you or both of you would like to speak to that and maybe explain more in depth what sustainability really encompasses.
Go for it, Sam.
Yeah, well, for me, sustainability is really about, it's not just, buying things that are like less impactful in the land. Like you can start there because, we're supposed to be using less palm oil because of the extractive qualities, moving away from being reliant on gas and fossil fuels for like your everyday travels. Sustainability should be encompassing all parts of your life. Like you said, it goes much deeper than just recycling and, trying to use less plastics and things like that. It's how you live your life every single day. And I think a huge part of sustainability for me would definitely be like, returning back to sort of the roots of things. Like, Greg was saying, like back in the 70s, I know like people have like diaper services where they would like send like cloth diapers to be, washed and reused. Like that wasn't a word that was like used to define that sort of like culture around, reusing like even diapers, which is something so simple, but like it was a sustainable practice that we can look back on and say, hey, that was sustainable. I think, for me, a large part of it is like reclaiming a lot of things that we had in our past, years before I was ever born. Like we had a greater sense of like sustainability, even though we probably didn't call it that back in the 70s and 80s. So, it's really about like reclaiming a lot of things that once stood. That's it.
I think sustainability is kind of the opposite of consumerism. We've grown so used to now to finding convenient ways to save our human energy. And at the same time, we're expending energy produced mostly by burning fossil fuels in the past, right? And so I think that really is kind of a big point in that sustainability. I think what we try and teach here at Community 2.0 is that sustainability is a lifestyle choice, right? We need to be much more mindful about how we burn fossil fuels. And of course, we want to quit them as soon as possible and use renewable resources for energy. But we also need to rethink the way that we purchase items, throw away items. When I grew up, we had the 3 R's that was reduce, reuse, recycle, right? That's kind of the mantra that everybody had. Nowadays, if you Google it, you can find 8 or 9 different R's, which is like repair, something that's old. My backpack ripped the other day and I thought, hey, let me just repair this thing. I don't need to get a new one. Regifting items that you've gotten that, it's something that my people give me socks all the time. Get rid of those, give them to somebody else. But instead of just tossing them away. And so it's rethinking things. It's rethinking the way we live. It's repairing and regifting things. It's really changing our lifestyle to be in tune and in harmony with the planet. Instead of just throwing stuff away and buying something new and getting out of that consumerism mindset. On the larger kind of a systemic and corporate picture, it's a big shift from a single bottom line of capitalism where people like petroleum companies or whoever they will earth and damage waterways. And they didn't care because the single bottom line of capitalism drove everything. And now a lot of businesses are adopting a triple bottom line mindset. And my organization was filed as a community benefit corporation. Some people call those B Corps, where we use the triple bottom line. And instead of making decisions based only on profitability, of course, we are for profit. We want to make money. I've got bills to pay like everybody else. But we also consider benefiting the environment as the choices that we make. And we also consider the people that we might be harming or people that we can be benefiting when we make our choices too. So sustainability is a big issue. I think it's a lifestyle choice is really what I think it would simmer down to, and an organizational choice.
Well, you mentioned it as being a lifestyle choice. And in in so doing, is this not really trying to sort of swim upstream against the tide? Beginning as early as the 1950s, technology was touted as the savior that would make everything more convenient. And that idea continued on through the decades, that technology would make things convenient, easier, and we would have to think less and less about everything we do. So the message of sustainability seems to really be moving in exactly the opposite direction. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, I think so. I think the days of thinking only about convenience and making our lives easy so we don't have to think a lot, I think those days are gone. We need to think clearly and in a very focused way about how we're living and how the planet is moving forward. We're on the path to disaster. The UN Intergovernmental Plan, what's it called? The IPCC, last report they released, I think, was in 2018, that said we have 12 years left to irreversible damage to the planet. So the global warming is creating a lot of change environmentally. Associated with that is biodiversity collapse. The rate of extinction of animals and plants now is much faster than it's ever been before. So the planet's in a world of hurt, and we need to be much more mindful instead of acting as we have been, which has been mindless, right? Our mindless ways have trashed the planet, and now we need to adopt mindful ways to act in harmony with the planet and to reverse the wrongs that we've done over the decades.
What would you say right now is the current status of our planet when it comes to sustainability? I know, Greg, you just mentioned a report suggesting that we're about 12 years away from the point of no return.
Well, more recent reports have come out. There's the climate clock in New York, which is basically a countdown to how many days we have until, I guess it's like a doom clock. It's like imminent disaster. I think last time I checked, it's like 6 years left, and we have 2 years to cut emissions. This is according to the UN General. And so we have 2 years to cut emissions before, just we're past the point of no return. And they sort of say we're past the point of no return all the time. And so, I think the state that we're in right now is a lot of people are paralyzed. Like, we don't know what to do. We feel like this is such an issue that is larger than us. And, a lot of us feel a sense of climate doom, a lot of climate anxiety. It's, we understand this is an issue, but we're so overpowered by the situation. It's like, how do we fix this? And, we're at this tipping point where I understand a lot of people are paralyzed with fear and they just don't know what they can do. And I think, the answer, I think, quite frankly, is really simple. It's, we need to cut emissions and we need to target, those that are responsible for causing the climate crisis and get them to cut the emissions. Like, to this day, they are producing the most amount of emissions, which are propelling us even further towards this disaster. So the point that we're in right now is it's do or die, frankly speaking. In Europe, we're seeing wildfires that have never been seen before. We're seeing the ice caps melt at an exponential rate. We can document this and see it in real time. 10 years ago, we're in a much more serious situation than we were. And then, even quite recently with Hurricane Ian, the effects were so much more severe because of the fact that we're in a climate emergency. And we can see that in real time. The death toll has increased. This is a very serious situation. And, we don't have a lot of time left, but we do have time left. But that's my take on it. Great.
I think, I think what Sim said is accurate. I would say the state of emergency. We're petitioning the city of Pasadena right now to put in writing that the climate is in a state of emergency, so that when we talk about electrifying buildings, we can say, and we want to take a half measure, for example, we say we need to refer back to this paper we just wrote saying, hey, we need to electrify all of our city vehicles, and we need to do now because we just said that it's an emergency, right? If this was your house burning, you wouldn't say, oh yeah, I'm going to wash my car next week. You'd say, I got to wash that thing right now. That's probably not a good example, but you get the point here. We're in a state of emergency. Recently, the UN Secretary General said that it's code red for humanity. The UN has taken off the gloves for 40 years. They didn't want people to panic, and so they were kind of putting things in gentle terms. Those days are gone. Code red for humanity, and they said we're in a race against time, and we're losing the race. So I don't think it gets any more urgent than it is right now. And it's on the shoulders of me and Sim and everybody else who's a climate activist out there to also speak very frankly about the situation, but also we want to be very positive about it. And I hope we can talk about that side also later on in this interview.
I'd like to go back to something that Sim said a moment ago in his response. Sim, you referred to them and they in talking about the people most responsible for, or the entities, I should say, most responsible for all of the pollution and the carbon issues. I'm wondering if you could be more specific about they and them. Who are they and them?
Yeah, it's definitely, the fossil fuel industry. We're talking ExxonMobil, Shell, Chevron, BP. I said before, BP created the carbon footprint, which is essentially, a measure that people can say how sustainable they are living in their lives and like to decrease their carbon footprint. Like, at the end of the day, we can preach, sustainability in your individual lives, but like, that's not going to change that. It's not going to change the fact that those most responsible for causing the climate crisis is the fossil fuel industry, and they need to cut all emissions, like period. Like we need to stop it. And we're accelerating towards climate disaster because they keep pushing out emissions at an exponential rate. Just recently, Biden just on past Friday, his administration approved a permit to fix. It was an offshore pipeline that busted back in 2021 on like around Orange County, and it shut down the beach for a week. They had to clean it up. It killed, hundreds of wildlife, and it was just disastrous conditions. And, he said when he was running for candidacy that he would end all new federal drilling, period. And, he's signing new permits like every single day. And so that's the situation we're in right now, and it's quite dire.
Yeah.
Well, I would also like to go back to something that you said, Greg, in your response a moment ago. You mentioned that at this point it's code red for all of humanity. I believe that's, I may be paraphrasing here, but that's about what you said. And I'm wondering how much of the problem today is that the average person is just overwhelmed and no longer taking a lot of this seriously. As you noted earlier, for years and years, no one wanted to acknowledge there was a problem. And now suddenly everybody's running around as if their hair is on fire. And how big an obstacle is it to overcome to convince people now that this is a legitimate emergency and that we need to take immediate action?
Well, that's the $64 trillion question, right? How do you convince people? I don't think we do. I personally think my strategy is we're casting a very wide net for people like early adopters like Sim, for people who are already taking action. Those of us, in fact, we're getting together on October 15th at the Green Economy Conference. We'll probably talk more about that in a minute. But my strategy is to cast a wide net to find the early adopters and bring them to the table so that we can leverage resources. I don't think we're going to convince, the conservative crowd, the MAGA crowd, those guys, the climate deniers. We're not going to convince them. So don't waste time doing that. What's important is that those of us who are acting to overcome climate challenges, that we work together, that we leverage resources. And that's what's really important. We're not going to convince everybody. I think if we can reach a tipping point of 1 billion people in the world in the next decade and have them adopt sustainable lifestyles and have them put pressure on their politicians to adopt forward-thinking policies and put pressure on corporations to adopt green practices, I think that's the strategy that's going to work and going to save the planet for humanity.
Like Greg said, you can't convince everyone. I mean, the fact of the matter is that not everyone got us into this mess, and we don't need everyone to get us out of this mess. I think, a lot of times we have wasted, this past, at least the past 10 years, we have wasted time trying to convince people that just don't care, or just frankly, they make up a new excuse every time you bring up the subject. There's always going to be people that drag their feet, and for us to try to get everyone on board with this, it's just not going to work. Like you cannot expend that amount of energy trying to convince everyone that this is an issue, because at the end of the day, the people that we need to convince are the people that are, like Greg said, they're signing legislation, they're making these executive orders, they're responsible for enforcing policy that will get us out of this mess. And so that's where we really need to be directing our energy. And we need to be, we need to be pulling those who are willing to act and willing to, get on board and stand with us. Like, that's who we need to be investing time in. But yeah, that's my perspective.
Well, to you gentlemen, I'd like to ask this next question also. What would each of you say is the leading current issue when it comes to sustainability?
Well, Sim said it a while ago. It's we have to quit burning fossil fuels, and there's the bottom line, right? That's what's overheating the planet. So in order to do that, we need to adopt more renewable sources of energy, which right now the big ones are solar and wind, but also geothermal and nuclear and other sources of energy like that. We need to focus on those solutions. The League of Women Voters here in Pasadena, and they're starting to let guys in now, since I'm a member, right? So they did a survey across the country of 10 actions that cities can take to reduce their greenhouse gases. I'm going to paraphrase this in just kind of 4 areas: right? Move away from fossil fuels, electrify buildings, electrify vehicles, and reduce vehicle use. They get much more detail than that, but those are the big ones that every city can take, and every citizen can contribute to that, right? I gave up my car about 3 years ago when I became a quote unquote an environmentalist, and said, this is, I need to shift my lifestyle. So we're a single car family now. I've been Ubering and taking Lyft cars all over the place. And I think the stat is that most cars just kind of sit in your driveway or your employer's parking lot for 95% of the time. Anyway, we don't need 2 cars. We get along very well with just 1 car. But we're making all kinds of different lifestyle changes that are not that hard. We're composting now. We're growing more of our own food. Just the other day, I think it was today, I was going to throw away a scrap of paper. I said, wait a minute, we can compost this. Let me go over there and compost this thing. And so it just becomes every decision that I make throughout the course of the day in my life now is aimed at helping to save the planet. So it's a lifestyle choice.
Well, gentlemen, if you'll forgive me for playing devil's advocate for just a moment, you were talking about the importance of moving away from fossil fuels, and they are so firmly entrenched in our everyday society, from the vehicle that you drive to the power generation that allows you to turn on your lights in the evening. We are surrounded by fossil fuels. There has been a large push to move to wind and solar power generation, and even hydroelectric generation. Of course, now with the climate crisis becoming what it is, we are seeing less and less water here on the West Coast, and that is severely hindering the hydroelectric power production. And we're already seeing power shortfalls in the afternoons when the wind and solar generation goes offline. At the same time, there is vehement opposition to the use of nuclear power. So how do we reconcile the idea of switching to alternative fuels and doing away with fossil fuels, and at the same time dealing with the problem of not in my backyard?
You want to take that, son?
Yeah, well, at first, I think addressing the fact that NIMBYs is a huge issue. Like, they have stonewalled, new housing developments, new sustainable practices. They've even stonewalled, public transit infrastructure. Like, we could have had high-speed rail in this country decades ago. We could have had, public transit in Los Angeles, like, that's more expanded than what it is now, decades ago. And, at a certain point, like, you have to understand you cannot appease everyone. You cannot negotiate with everyone. There's some people that just won't be moved. And that's going to be the cost for, like, the greater good of this entire planet, of all the species. Like, I think reconcile, like, what's at stake here is more important than someone's backyard. Like, at the end of the day, like, people are, like, the military is literally dumping jet fuel into the water in Hawaii. Like, they're building, like, all types of things in people's backyards, but they just can't complain because these people don't have, like, the wealth and the power and the access to do that. And we still build things in their backyard. We're still testing nuclear weapons and nuclear equipment in New Mexico on reservations. Like, I think at the end of the day, trying to appease everyone, especially, these people that have the loudest voice because they have the most money, because they have access to platforms, it's just not going to work when we have been doing things in people's backyard without their consent for forever. And so I really don't think that's, like, a valid excuse not to move forward on something that is going to, protect all life on this planet and honestly get us to where we need to be. We can address people's concerns later. I do want to hit on the fact though that, before we do anything, whether it is building, solar or nuclear or whatever, we need to have the consent and or prior and informed consent of the indigenous peoples, period. Anything that we leave with, when it comes to development on this country, we have to be in right relations with the indigenous peoples on this planet. And that's where I'm going to stand on that. We need to do it regardless of NIMBYs and their dissent, but whatever we do need to do needs to be led by indigenous voices and there. But that's my perspective on that.
I was just in a conversation the other day about electric cars and electric batteries, and people are saying we can't do that. We can't go to cars, electric cars, batteries are going to trash the planet. Here's the bottom line: we need to quit burning fossil fuels, or the planet's going to burn up. Right? That's the bottom line. We need these electric cars and the batteries that they have now, because that's the next best alternative. And of course, we want to get the batteries more or less polluting, but we don't have time to waste. The bottom line question here is, are these actions that we're taking now, are they going to save the planet for humanity or not? There's the bottom line. And if they're not, then we need to disrupt our thinking and disrupt the way businesses make decisions and the way governments make decisions. And we need to change those dramatically. So the NIMBY question is, well, do you want to still be on this planet living in 10 years or not? Will that change your mind as to whether or not we have some solar panels in your backyard or maybe a nuclear plant? I think it does. I think it's a dramatic change when you put it that clearly to people. Planet's burning up. Do you want to live another decade or not?
Well, another one of the large issues involved with solar power generation is that the onus for paying for the equipment falls almost entirely on the homeowner. There are some subsidies available through the government, but they hardly make a dent in the cost of investing in a solar system. And most solar systems are only really intended to operate for about 20 years before the panels need to be replaced. So right about the time you get through paying off your investment, you're having to make another investment. Is there something that can be done to lower the costs and make it a more attractive option to the average homeowner?
President Biden, issues new subsidies for the fossil fuel company, basically every single day. We can do the same he does it for, the federal government does it for dairy, which is, responsible for a huge amount of pollution. The meat industry, fossil fuels, it's possible to do subsidies for these equipments. At the end of the day, the cost, I don't really think it should be a factor in whether or not we have a livable planet or children being born with a future in the next 10, 15 years. The cost of the climate crisis is going to the cost of the climate crisis to repair and to adapt, if we wait too late, is going to, it's going to completely destroy the cost of it takes to subsidize solar for the entire country. That's the direction that we need to be moving in. It's people say, oh, it costs too much, or the cost of not acting is so much greater than, subsidizing some solar panels or subsidizing high-speed rail or subsidizing public transit. The cost is so much greater. It is literally the destruction of this entire planet and life as we know it. Life will never be the same again. And, like Greg said, when you put it in the cost benefit analysis, it completely, it destroys it. You cannot sacrifice the entire planet because something costs too much. I don't know, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and let me just kind of piggyback on that. The bottom line question here is that we need a major mindset from we can't afford to do it to we can't afford not to do it, right? The stakes are that great. This is a dire situation where we have to find solutions. And instead of saying, well, we can't do it, we need to find ways. Here again, in the conference that we're going to have on October 15th, the Green Economy Conference, we're talking about game changers that are dramatically changing our ability to address the challenges that face us. I don't know if now's the time to get into that or not, but major factors around the world are changing because the climate situation is getting dramatically worse, and people are finally waking up. Cities are waking up. The corporate community is waking up. Technology is advancing at an exponential pace, and all of those are going to contribute to our ability to save the planet.
Well, and again, forgive me for playing devil's advocate, but I can't help but wonder if the idea of talking about how we can't afford not to do anything at this moment isn't a little bit of idealistic thinking. Humans are notoriously short-sighted. And when the average homeowner or the average citizen is faced with a choice between feeding his family tonight or paying for solar panels tomorrow, they're probably going to choose feeding their family. And this is why I ask, aren't there steps that can be taken to make this a more affordable and thereby more attractive option for the average citizen? It wasn't that long ago that if you installed solar panels, you were able to sell some of that power that you didn't use but generated back to the power company. But recently, the amount of money the power company has to pay you for that has been substantially decreased. And it seems likely that the power companies themselves will continue to lobby to reduce even further the amount of money that they have to pay for the surplus generation.
Well, I don't think there's any easy answers here. But let me just talk about one thing that's changed dramatically in our ability to reframe how we address the climate emergency. Last year, we ran a Green Economy Conference in October. And right after that, all the nations got together at their COP26 meeting in Glasgow. And about 150 nations came to the table and said, guess what? We didn't do what we said we were going to do at Paris. We didn't do it again. Pretty much, I think the nations have lost credibility and the politicians that run them. We can't trust the politicians to save the planet. We can't trust the nations to save the planet. Here's an interesting thing. Right after that COP26 meeting, almost like within a week, ex-mayor Bloomberg of New York City and Mark Carney, who was the former head of the Bank of England, got about 450 of their asset manager buddies. These are the guys that manage the wealth in the world, right? Wealth for sovereign nations, wealth for the billionaires. This is a large chunk of change. The UN said it's going to take between 100 and 150 trillion dollars to save the planet over the next few decades. And then the next thing that they said is that money is not available anywhere except in the hands of private wealth, right? There aren't any country or group of countries that have that kind of cash. No corporation or group of corporations. It's only private wealth. So Bloomberg and Mark Carney got together with 450 asset managers who manage that wealth into this group called the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. 450 companies, $130 trillion pledged to achieve the Paris climate goals. So this is a huge amount of money. This is what the UN says it's going to take to solve the crisis, and it's now available. So the question is not, can we afford it? The question is, we can afford it, and how do we use this money effectively to find effective solutions to the climate challenges?
That may be the biggest challenge right there, is finding entities that will oversee this effectively so that the monies are actually directed to solving the problem and not simply lining pockets. Right. I know we have sort of fixated on discussing power issues. And Greg, you had mentioned that there are a lot of positive aspects, and you did want to have some time to discuss those as well. Sim, I'm sure you'd like to also. And so, Greg, I'm going to go to you because I'm wondering if there is something specific that you wanted to bring to light as far as the positive aspects.
Well, yeah. And let me just say again, I hope people can come to our Green Economy Conference Saturday, October 15th here at Pasadena City College between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m., where we're going to talk about this very topic. The biggest one is what I just mentioned about the availability of $130 trillion. This is a game changer, right? These are what how so many people talk about the smart money. This is the smart money saying, if we don't save the planet, all of our assets are going to burn up and they're going to be worthless. So now they're making that money available to save the planet. The second one is, I just said that nations have proven 7 years in a row they're not going to solve the problems. Coincidentally, cities have taken the lead on providing solutions for environmental challenges. You might know that outgoing Mayor Garcetti here in LA was just recently the chair of a group called C40, which is about 100 large cities around the world, including LA, who have all committed to achieving net zero by 2050 or sooner. So here's 100 examples of people doing the right thing in different cities. There's a much larger organization called the Global Covenant of Mayors, over 11,000 cities around the world that have committed to net zero. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. In fact, what we need to do is find the solutions of these guys who are on the cutting edge of climate solutions and then just replicate them in our towns. And the last one is technology. Short explanation here is, when we did the first industrial revolution about 100 years ago, The transition from person power and horsepower to steam power revolutionized our industrial output around the world. Cut to the chase now, there's about 24 different technologies, not one technology like steam, but there's 24 technologies that are disrupting society. AI, VR, 3D printing, material science, on and on and on, that are dramatically changing our ability to think about things and how to do things. An example is we can have 100 people or 1,000 people out there planting trees, or we can have a group of drones. Drones can plant trees much faster and in much steeper terrain than people can. So using technologies like that, there is a dramatic increase in the way that we can address climate challenges. I mean, there's a lot of examples, and that's what we're going to talk about at that Green Economy Conference. Joe, I hope you can make it.
Certainly look into that. You just mentioned something else in your response, though, Greg, and so I hate to dive right back into the negative pool for a moment, but I would be remiss if I didn't bring this up. For all of the efforts that we may be striving to achieve here in the United States, there are many other nations around the world that don't seem to see this as big an emergency as some would like it to be viewed as.
Right.
And with that in mind, because you mentioned the Industrial Revolution, there are several nations around the world that are arguing that what we are advocating for now simply isn't fair, because we had our shot at the Industrial Revolution and it put us up as a world power. And now we're telling everyone else in the world, you can't do the same.
There are better ways to generate energy, right? We've talked about them. Solar panels, geothermal, wind power like that. These are the ways to both generate the power that countries need, but also in a way that doesn't spoil the planet for the immediate families and like that. The way that we did things in the past in America was stupid. The way that we need to move forward is in a mindful way. Let me just restate that. The way that we did things in the past was mindless, and we need to move forward in a more mindful way. And that's what we need to talk to people about.
Again, I see you nodding your head in agreement. I did want to bring up also that as a climate activist for Youth Climate Strike LA, you were recently responsible for a large gathering to try and raise awareness. And I'm wondering if you could talk a moment about that.
Yeah, so we just had a climate strike on September 23rd. It was a global climate strike. So essentially, there was over 600 strikes happening probably within the same day across the globe. So, there's climate strikes in Africa and Europe, everywhere, really. And so, we organized, and we had very targeted demands. We were targeting LAUSD, which is like one of the largest landowners in Los Angeles, to, adopt more sustainable practices, to, provide equity for their students of color. And, we also targeted our own city hall, because only 3 out of the 18 sitting, members that sit within the chambers almost every single day have signed the No Fossil Fuel Money Pledge. And many of them are running for re-election in this coming cycle, the general election in this year, 2022. And then, of course, in 2024, they're running again. And so, we targeted them, and we said, it doesn't really make sense for you to hold office in Los Angeles if you're not going to commit to not taking any fossil fuel money. And so, that is part of the reason why we held the demonstration on the 23rd.
All right. Well, so far we've talked about, again, a lot of the negative aspects, and now we're sort of moving into the positive side of things. So now I would like to ask each of you, what are some things that individuals can do? At the outset of the program, we talked about how if you mention sustainability to probably the average American, you're going to get a response of, well, recycling is the catchword there. But what other things can people do to decrease their carbon footprint, to create a more sustainable future?
You want to take that, Sam?
Yeah, I think one of the hugest things, I can't stress enough, is more than 50, well, it's about 50% of emissions in California come from transportation. And everyone in California drives a car. Everyone in Los Angeles, we're such a car-centered, society, culture in LA. Everyone drives their car, and it's driving up emissions. If you as an individual, are serious about sustainability and serious about, your impact on the environment, you need to seek out, alternative methods of transportation. I know like a lot of people in my generation, like literally like within my friend group, like none of us have a license and none of us drive. So I like boycotted getting my driver's license because of the climate emergency, and I haven't driven a car because of it. And you know, it's a very similar mindset within like my entire friend group. We're like really excited about the K line opening. It's a metro line that's opening up on Friday. And so, you know, I think number one is you have to seek out alternative methods of transportation. And, you know, in addition to that, you can change your diet. You can change, you know, where you buy clothes. Like fast fashion has got to go. Like that's also really huge, but definitely alternative methods of transportation.
Yeah.
Greg, did you have a follow-up to that?
I think Sim is right. I mentioned earlier that I gave up my car. I think that we have this consumerism mindset that we have to have all these things in our life, you know, and I think that just is not accurate. I think people could easily give up their car and Uber around or take public transportation or walk or bike. I think that's really easy. Yeah. I mentioned also we're growing our own food here. We have an aeroponic garden in our backyard, so it doesn't take up a lot of space. We're composting. There's so many things that we can do. I've been thinking, you know, I don't have to go to the office anymore since COVID hit. And I'm looking in my closet. There's all these dress shirts and all these, you know, business suits, and you know, I don't need that stuff. I don't need to be buying new clothes at a fancy store anymore. I mean, the Goodwill has clothes and Salvation Army has clothes. And I talked to a friend of mine recently, had this beautiful blouse. And she said, I paid $5 for this blouse at Salvation Army. You know what? There's clothes we can get all over the place. We don't have to buy new things all the time. We don't have to buy new cars. We don't have to buy new anything, right? We can repair and regift and reuse things. And we need to adopt that mindset that we can live much more sensibly, we can live much more mindfully, and we have to do it to save the planet.
I'm wondering if either of you gentlemen are struck by the irony of what some of the sustainability movement entails. Greg, you were just mentioning the idea of repairing, and that was a mindset that previous generations had. The idea that when you made a purchase of a major item, whether it be a car or an appliance, you were purchasing something for the long term. And if there were problems with it, you simply got them repaired and then you continued on. Somewhere along the line, society's mentality changed and we switched to a disposable economy where we purchase items and they have a very finite life expectancy. And then we're basically taught to cast them away and replace them with the latest, greatest. And a perfect example that comes to mind are computers and mobile devices, where the idea is every 2 years you should be getting something new. How do you change this mentality?
You know, I think that mindset came from corporate America and marketing campaigns to make us want to buy more things and make us buy things that we didn't need and to keep buying them and turning them in. I really think that we need to put pressure on corporations to quit doing that. And I've been heartened to see ads from tennis shoe companies who are making tennis shoes that are completely recyclable, right? This is part of the circular economy. So they're building a tennis shoe that is meant to be worn. And then when it's not useful anymore as a tennis shoe, to be taken back and recycled, not just into a playground or something, but into new shoes again. So it's just complete cycle of the economy there. I think we need to do more of that. We need to vote with our dollars and tell corporations what we want them to do. And we need to vote with our votes and vote out politicians that aren't voting green anymore or voting half measures that aren't going to save the planet. We need to kind of, I just bought the URL Uprising Together because I think now I'm of the opinion that we need a global uprising of people like me and Sim and all of our friends to take back power from governments and to influence governments in the interim before taking over power. But we need to vote with our voices and our dollars and make our voices heard and tell these corporations and governments in no uncertain terms that we need dramatic action, we need urgent action, we need out of the box thinking and acting, and we don't have time to wait. We need to do it now.
Well, I realize that neither one of you profess to be climatologists, but I would like to ask, certainly one of the big issues that constantly is being readdressed in the mass media right now is the drought situation here in the Southern California, basically the West Coast region. It's ironic that we are seeing so much water on the eastern side of the country and so little of it here. A recent report came out probably within the last couple of days, indicating that the current expectation is the La Nina condition will persist for at least another year, meaning that we will see again probably record low rainfall, rain totals, and a continuation and an exacerbation of the current climate crisis, the drought situation. How directly connected to sustainability is what we're seeing?
Zim, you want to take that or me?
Yeah. So, the drought is like huge. Like, we've been in a drought longer than I've been born. And that's the fact of the matter of the situation. Like, the climate crisis got us into this, but then echoing back on sustainability practices when it comes to drought is immeasurable, because in California we're growing things that we really have no business growing in a drought. We're allocating insane amounts of water towards livestock, towards nuts, almonds, pistachios. These are like really water intensive crops, and we're like allocating like a majority of our water resources to growing these things. Like, when it comes to like sustainability practices on water, like, yes, cut down water in your home, cut down water in your business, cut down water everywhere, recycle water. But, like, at the end of the day, we like just recently DWP issued this thing because, celebrities are using like insane amounts of water to put water into their fountains. And like, they're like, okay, we're going to cut you guys off finally. First, they're just finding them. But these guys have like insane amounts of money. They have millions of dollars. Like, their little fine of like $1 million for wasting water, it means nothing to them. Like, it's literally changed. And so, them as in DWP cutting down, the access to water for like, celebrities or these entities that have extreme amounts of wealth that are just wasting water, or, even like, businesses, farms, or like livestock facilities, whatever, that's abusing our water in California. Like, we could be in a much better place if we had more sustainable water practices. At the end of the day, like, yes, we're in a drought. Yes, we need to cut down water uses, but this is not an impossible thing to tackle. Like, we know the entities that are responsible for abusing, the water usage in California, and they need to go. Like, it's that simple.
Yeah. Mayor Garcetti said recently in a newspaper article that the drought is here to stay. Joe, you're absolutely right. You can see the reservoirs, Lake Mead and other reservoirs that are pretty much depleted, right? I mean, there's a trickle of water left, but that's about it. Garcetti called this the new abnormal, right? We're not going to go back to the days when those reservoirs are full. So what do we need to do? Well, we know that when it rains in LA, all these massive amounts of water are going through these flood channels into the ocean. Why can't we just capture that water, right? I mean, we need to store that water somewhere where it can go back down into the aquifer instead of letting it go straight to the ocean. I think that's a no-brainer. How can we not be doing that already? So we need the government to think very differently about the flood control system in LA, but we need people as well. We recently had to turn our sprinklers off for about 16 days while some kind of repair was going on. All of our lawns, I think I have maybe 4 small lawns, and they all turned brown. And we're thinking, well, let's just yank these things out and put in some xeriscaping here, right? Let's just put in some drought tolerant plants here instead of these lawns. Well, we have a dog, so I like to keep one little lawn where he can, throw the ball around. But the other ones, we don't really need them. And that's part of my ongoing mindset shift to, what are the challenges? What are the changes I'm willing to make to my mindset about, what success looks like, such that I can and be more in tune with the planet. So there's so much more that we can do. We need political will. We need people to get up off their couch and quit thinking about what's convenient to do and start doing things that are going to save the planet.
Well, does this not also speak to an issue of education, or perhaps the lack thereof? It seems that most Southern Californians grew up unawares that we actually live in a desert, and the vast majority of the water that we drink and use here in the Southern California area is imported from other parts of the country. Shouldn't we be working more toward education as a way of combating? I don't want to use the word ignorance because it sounds harsh, but on some level, maybe that is the best word to use.
Yeah. Take it on, Zimmerman.
Yeah, well, within Youth Climate Strike, we're fighting for climate literacy. This is part of education from K through 12. And we've seen like studies have shown that when, children are educated on sustainable practices, on, carbon emissions in general, like they live more sustainable lives. And so I agree with you, like education it should be at the forefront of this. But, at the end of the day, the Resnicks, they're this billionaire family that have these nut companies that are growing in California, and they get like insane amounts of our water resources. Like they need to go. So yeah, education is huge, but like also making sure like people understand like the blame is not on the consumer. Well, it is on the consumer for buying, walnuts and pistachios that are grown in California. Maybe if we stop buying them and just boycott the company altogether, they'll leave. But like at the end of the day, the responsibility is once again on these companies. It's the fossil fuel industry. It is these walnut companies, these pistachio companies. Like I think we need to be very clear about who we're pointing the finger at, and understanding like personal responsibility will only get you so far.
Well, we are coming into the final minutes of the show. And before we do run out of time, I wanted to take an opportunity to get more information available to our viewers at home. So I want to start again, Greg, you're at the top of my screen, so you're the one I pick on first. Nothing personal, but Community 2.0. I'm wondering if there are ways that our viewers at home can get in touch with you, if they want more information, if they want to become involved. How would they go about reaching?
It's just remember my name, Apodaca.com. It's pretty simple. There are ways people can get involved. Absolutely. We started running an eco town hall. Sim was our guest a month ago or so. So we're trying to get the word out that way. We're inviting partner organizations to come and join us so that we can get a much larger crowd. And it doesn't matter to me if those partners are churches or businesses or nonprofits or whoever. Anybody who is an early adopter of the climate emergency, the state of emergency of the climate, is welcome to participate in our town hall. We're launching a new program called a Plant Covered City, and maybe even a Plant Covered State, because we can work with nature to sequester carbon just by planting native trees and vegetation. Hopefully, we're going to launch something with one of Governor Newsom's campaigns and another nonprofit, so that we can do a statewide program to plant these trees and native vegetation, so we can do that. Our Green Economy Conference, October 15th here in Pasadena. We'll talk about basically just what we're talking about in this TV show today, the game changers. How do you use exponential technologies? How do you use all this cash from impact investors? How do you replicate best practices that cities around the world are doing? And how can we do that right here in our hometown? So there's so many ways to get involved with us. We need everybody's help. If you have social media skills, or if you have writing skills, fund development skills, we need all of that stuff to help grow our organization so that we can have huge impacts, which is what we need.
All right. And Sim, Youth Climate Strike LA, can you tell our viewers at home how they can reach you and become involved if they'd like to learn more?
Yeah, we're really active on Instagram and Twitter. You can also email us, but our ad is YC Strike LA. So it's, just YC and then Strike LA. But we host like all sort of education events. Just coming up on the 14th, in 10 days, we're having our second ever like youth-led candidates forum. Essentially, it's a way for young people to, connect directly to, candidates that are running for office, in Los Angeles. I think we have someone coming from Santa Monica, just in a way that's really direct, and understand like the impact that these offices and officials can have on their everyday lives, and like, why they should actually vote for them instead of just being told, vote for this person. And then in addition to that, in the coming months of like December, we're going to host a 4-part series of basically like the intersecting movements between, water, earth, fire, and like air when it comes to the climate crisis. And it's going to be a teach-in. So, if you follow our social media or like join our mailing list, you can get updated on different events that we have.
Yeah. All right. In our last couple of minutes here on the program, I wanted to take an opportunity to ask each of you gentlemen for your final thoughts on our topic this evening. And Sim, since I have picked on Greg so many times, and I don't want anyone to think that we're trying to ignore you in the program, I'm going to go to you first for your final thoughts this evening.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess my final thought for this evening is, like Greg said, we need everyone in this movement, and I can't echo that enough. I cannot stress that enough. Like, where we're at a very scary time that I know literally every single climate activist, every single environmental activist in Los Angeles by name. I probably have them on my phone. If I don't, I know them by name. Like, this is a very dire situation. Like, it cannot just be on me or Greg or people in my phone book. Like, we need everyone. And so, I can't stress enough that, if you want to get involved, and no matter your hesitation, like, you need to do it, and you need to do it now.
Thank you. And Greg, your final thoughts on
I like to end on a positive note. It is a huge challenge to stay positive with all the reality of the situation. But I love what Paul Hawkins said in his book Drawdown, about how we can choose to see global warming not as an inevitability, but as an invitation to be creative, to innovate, to find our passion, and to tap our genius to come up with solutions. And, this is going to take the biggest global movement ever if we're going to defeat the climate challenge. And this guy, Danny Chivers, wrote in his book, The No Nonsense Guide to Climate Change, his phrase that is, I have it right here on my wall to inspire me. But he said, this is going to be the most amazing, inspiring, and unifying social movement that the world has ever seen. So think about that. If we can get all the activists in America working with the activists in Mexico and Canada and in Europe and Asia, how cool is it going to be when we finally beat this thing? I mean, how cool is it going to see that people come across maybe adversarial paths and national boundaries to work together on saving the planet for humanity? It's going to be pretty amazing. And that picture, that vision is what keeps me going. And I hope that inspires people who are watching here today to get off their couch and get active with us.
Community 2.0 CEO Greg Apodaca and Youth Climate Strike LA climate activist Sim Bilal. Thank you, gentlemen, both for joining us this evening. It has been a pleasure speaking with the both of you.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it.
Your viewers at home, if there are topics you would like to see addressed on this program, you can email them to arroyolive@pasadenamedia.org, and we may include them in a future broadcast. Until next time, this has been Arroyo Live. I'm Joe Carbonetta. Thank you for watching, and good night.